And a big key feature of flowering plants, of course, are the flowers themselves. So in class we have a variety of flowers. We have Crespedia here, we have Ostromeria here, and we have mums here. I'm actually going to dissect one of each of these and get this on video for you guys so you can kind of look it over and check it out. Okay. Flowers, of course, are the reproductive structures. Plants put a lot of energy into flowers. And flowers then have highly ornate, very intricate structures. Typically those intricate structures then are associated with the pollinators. And so these have specific, very specific relationships with the pollinators. And we have a lot of coevolution going on between the pollinators and the flowers themselves. Alright, so for our flower dissection, I'll start with Ostromeria. And these guys have kind of combo petals and sepals called tepals. And we'll go back and we'll remove that so we can see these guys. We'll remove that one. And that one, so there we go. So we can see that one a lot better now. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take a section down through the ovary. So here's the ovary. Right here, I want to cut right down the middle of that ovary. Okay. And I have two parts, and we'll examine all of these individual parts with the dissecting scope. Okay, so here's our Ostromeria underneath the dissecting scope. And again, we're looking for spores, sporophytes, gametophytes, gametes. So these are both stamen. The stamen then is the male reproductive part in the flower. Inside the stamen then, right, the flower itself is part of the sporophyte, so the flower is diploid. The stamens then are diploid, and then specific cells in the stamens are going to go through meiosis. Even distribution, dividing in meiosis, right, to produce microspores. Those microspores become pollen grains, and so here, just go in and focus on this pollen grain. Okay, if I can get it. So if we can get this to focus in. I'll zoom in and take a close-up look at these pollen grains on top of these stamens. So you can see how sticky they are. They're displayed on top of the stamens. We have all those sticky pollen grains. So when that pollinator comes in, that pollen will stick to the pollinator. Okay. I'm going to go a little bit more. Let's see if we can't see those, but that's cool. So you can see all those little pollen grains then on the outside of the stamen, all sticky there, ready for a pollinator, ready to stick to that pollinator. Okay, so we'll continue our quest for spores, sporophytes, gametes, gametophytes. Right now we have a sporophyte. The sporophyte then makes a flower. On that flower we have male and female parts, and the anthers are the male parts. Okay, so the anther itself then is diploid, and we'll look over here at the anther. Then, and this is a cross section through an anther. The anther is diploid. We'll zoom in here on this anther. Okay, now our sporophyte then goes through meiosis to make spores. So here the anther itself is diploid. Inside we've gone through meiosis to make spores. In this case it's even divisions to make 4 microspores. Those 4 microspores then go through mitosis to make the gametophyte, and the gametophyte is the pollen grain. So here are all the pollen grains inside this anther that we can see there. Okay, now we'll follow this up with a prepared slide of mixed pollen from a lot of different flowering plants. So plants can use a variety of different strategies to get their pollen to where they want it to go. Okay. And one of the key things about flowering plants is that flowering plants have flowers, and those flowers are specially adapted to work with pollinators. As a result, then there's a lot of different types of pollen out there that's associated with the specific pollinators that can move that pollen. The nice thing about it as far as costs and benefits, if you just use wind dispersal, right, you got to make tons and tons and tons and tons of pollen to go out and hopefully have it land where it wants to go. However, if you can then harness the sensory receptors and flying ability of animals, those animals then, primarily insects in this case, although birds as well, can then go in and get the pollen, but they're going to use their senses to go in and find the exact same flower. So your pollen, instead of just randomly getting blown in the wind, can go in and specifically go to where you want it to go. Now in this case, this is a pretty cool slide in that here we have a bunch of pollen here. Okay, so this is all kinds of pollen on here. And one of the cool things that I like about this slide is just the diversity of these pollen grains. So we'll go in and we'll look at this in a little more detail. So this is just a lot of mixed pollen in here, and and you can just see tons of diversity in those pollen grains, right? A lot of flowering plants you can identify by the pollen. So I'll switch this over here to the compound scope, and we will quickly look at this in the compound scope. We'll switch over the camera, and we'll check this out. So just amazing, all the diversity there. We'll flip up to the 100x magnification. You just kind of focus in and out here. It's just really amazing how diverse pollen is. Right, so these are the male gametophytes, all different types of male gametophytes from these flowering plants. Okay, these are haploid, right? One in, and just all different types in here. All right, cool. Cool. So, and here's that cross section through the ovary, or a long section, excuse me, through the ovary. Okay, that you saw me take with the scalpel there. The outside part is the ovary, right? The ovary is diploid. And flowering plants' key characteristic is that the ovary fully encloses the seeds. Okay, if you think about eating a plum, what do you think you eat when you eat a plum? The fleshy part of a plum. Okay, so you're actually eating a plant's ovary when you're eating a plum. Okay, an apple is the peduncle that's been increased. The core of the apple is actually the ovary. But when you eat a plum or a peach, you're eating the plant's ovary. So kind of gross, huh? So here we are, and then we'll zoom in on this guy here. Inside the ovary are the ovules. So those are all the ovules. So we can clearly see those ovules now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 ovules there that we can clearly see. Right? And inside the ovules, that's where we have meiosis producing the spore. And then once we get that spore produced, then we get an egg, right? A gametophyte, then the egg, and then we get fertilization in there, okay? That's about as close as I can get to the ovules. How steady my hand is, that stuff. So those are the ovules. It's a nice close-up view of the ovules in my hands. Not steady enough to get really any closer, but that's as close as we get. So those are the ovules. Then inside the ovules, as I mentioned, is where the gametophyte, where the spore is produced, right? Then the gametophyte, then the female gamete being the eggs, then out at the stigma, right? The pollen lands on the stigma, pollen tube grows down all the way into these ovules, and then the sperm nuclei fertilize the eggs, right? And then here is where the seed develops. So again, think about an apple. When you eat an apple, the core of the apple is the ovary, and the seeds then develop inside the apple when we eat it. Okay, so the next slide we'll look at here is a lilium, lilium being the genus, lily genus, ovary, 8 nucleus stage. So I'm just going to shoot over here and let you see what's on this slide then. So here we have ovaries, and these are cross sections through the ovaries. Okay. Each of these cross sections, then I'll go ahead and just focus in on one. So one of the characteristics of flowering plants is that the seeds develop fully inside the ovary, or enclosed inside the ovary. Okay. So here we have at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different ovaries to choose from to get what we're looking for. Now you can focus in then, and around the outside then is our ovary. Our ovary is diploid. Inside that ovary then we see 6 little structures in there. Those 6 structures are called ovules. Inside the ovule then, the ovule itself is diploid. We have meiosis producing a spore. In this case, the meiosis is uneven, so we have a megaspore. That megaspore then hatches out into, or divides into, a multi-celled gametophyte, right? And so 1 division in mitosis goes from 1 cell to 2, 2 divisions to 4, 3 divisions to 8. So on these ovules, we're looking for an intact ovule with 8 cells inside. For those 8 cells, we want to particularly look at 1 cell being the egg, and then 2 more cells being the polar nuclei. Okay, and so we're going to move this slide over to the compound scope and find a representative ovule. Okay, so now we're under the compound scope. This is the 4x objective, 400x magnification. We'll switch in the 10x. Okay, so here's our 10x. So we have 100x total magnification. Now we'll switch in the 40x. Okay, and here is our 40x objective. And now we can see the 8 nucleate stage. So in the right there we can see 3 cells. The one that's kind of blurry in the apex, that's the egg. Then if we go back in the main part, we can see 2 larger cells there. Okay, those 2 then are going to be our polar nuclei. So a pollen tube grows in. It then grows into the ovule. 1 sperm nucleus fertilizes the egg, which becomes the zygote. The second sperm nucleus goes in and fertilizes the 2 polar nuclei to produce triploid endosperm. The endosperm then acts as the food for the seed. And that food is important, right, because then it allows the seed, when it lands, to push down that shoot, or push up the shoot and push down that root, and thus it can occupy drier habitats and doesn't have to rely upon direct water like the fern and the moss do. Okay, so I was over at the store and I just thought I would get this Crespedia because it looked really cool. I wanted to check it out underneath the dissecting scope. But when you look at a lot of these plants like sunflowers and composites, then all of those little teeny tiny things in the middle are actually the flowers. And the flowers have full petals and everything on the inside of those guys. Okay, so this is Crespedia, and all of these little things then are individual flowers. So I thought I'd just get in here and focus on one of these little itty bitty guys being a flower, just to see what we can see in here. Looks like it has pollen all over it, so we can see the pollen everywhere on the outside of that flower there. See if I can't move it and get it right in the center of field of view here. But look at all that pollen. So any pollinator gets on it at all, it's going to get a lot of pollen in it. Move that just barely there. Hey, got it. Okay, I'm just zoom in really close then, and we can kind of check this guy out super close. Okay, you can't quite see any of the internal features of it, but we can kind of see how this is an individual teeny tiny flower thing on the outside. So just quick discussion here. So flowering plants are really diverse, right? You know, the flowers themselves are highly specialized to interact with animal-mediated pollination. But also we have a lot of flowers that produce fruits. You know, fruits then are also for animal-mediated dispersal, where instead of investing in wings, you invest in a fruit. Animal eats the fruit. It swallows the seeds, and it goes and poops out the seeds, right? So as a seed, then, you know, you get specifically sent to a good location, but if you get pooped out, just like with the fungus, right, you're already in a nice fertilized soil, okay? So a lot of fertilizer there, which helps to put your shoot down and your root up. And seeds oftentimes get cached by animals. So if the animals cache the seeds, then you're actually under the ground when you start. So it's a lot easier to push a shoot down, or root down, but not necessarily a shoot up. So again, we see these same themes over and over, right? We have mechanisms for diversity, and we have mechanisms for dispersal, okay? And we have mechanisms for being able to survive in arid environments. So a lot of adaptations then for land environments that get these plants away from water, and so that they don't rely upon water, and they can adaptively radiate out into almost any type of habitat.